Hey there nation, welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander CheapSkate, and we are back with another episode of the Underhive Wars. This is a series of Necromunda battle reports that are chronicling the Sector 7 Turf War campaign for the Dominion campaign that we're playing for our Necromunda gaming group. And this one is battle report number 33 and is fought between my two friends Scream of the Emo and Fresh Prince Bel-Air. Scream of the Emo is bringing the red faction of the Genestealer Cults, while Fresh Prince Bel-Air is bringing the iron sights of House Orlock. So we are now thoroughly within the takeover phase of our campaign. The gangs are now fighting one another in order to take each other's territories away from each other. And so on this one, real quick, we'll play some background music. If you want to see exactly what these gangs are bringing for this one, go ahead and pause and take a look at your leisure. So that being said, let's get this battle report on a roll. Alright, so let's go and talk about the scenario rules real quick. The scenario for this one is standoff. It is a good old-fashioned gang fight between the red faction as well as the iron sights. We have standard deployment rules as always, and for the victory conditions on this one, you get points for every single enemy fighter you put out of action. You earn 3 points for taking out leaders, 2 points for champions, and 1 point for everyone else. Whoever has the most points by the end of the battle report ends up being the winner. For the rewards, the victor earns D6 times 10 credits, while the loser earns D3 times 5 credits. For experience, everybody who participates in the battle report earns 1 experience point, while the winning gang leader earns a bonus experience point. For reputation, the winner earns 2 points of reputation, and of course both gangs also earn a point of reputation for fighting against each other for the very first time. And since this is the first time that Scream of the Emo as well as Fresh Prince Bel-Air are fighting against each other, they both earn that additional point. And of course, if anybody battles out, they also lose 1 point of reputation as well. So with the scenario rules over, let's go and talk about the battle plan for this one. So as you can see, they're playing in a Sector Mechanicus battlefield on a 4x4 table. My friend Fresh Prince Bel-Air is deployed on the far side of the table, while Scream of the Emo is deployed on the near side of the table. And as for the battle plan, I'm not really sure what their plans are because I wasn't the one playing this battle, I was just taking the photos. But it looks like it's a straight up line deployment. It looks like that we have flankers on the left as well as the right hand side, as well as gangers in the middle for both sides. So it looks like they're just kind of lining up their forces and just kind of going at each other for the most part. And that pretty much makes the battle plan for this one. So with the battle plan over, let's go talk about deployment real quick. Alright, so starting on the left-hand side for the red faction, this is the Genestealer Cults gang. On the left-hand side, Scream of the Emo has deployed his ganger Pikmin, who is a neophyte hybrid on the left-hand side. He's got a hazard suit as well as a power pick, an autogun, and auto pistol. And right next to him on the right-hand side, that huge behemoth, that is Dagon the aimbot. He's got twin tunneling claws as well as light carapace armor. He's got the infiltrate skill as well as the cranial governor's excavation autonoma, as well as the valuable special rules as well. My friend Scream of the Emo decided not to use the infiltrate rules on his ambot. He decided to keep them right next to his main fighting force. Right in the middle of this little fire team is Marsh. He is a cult alpha. He's got a hazard suit. He's also packing 3 stub guns with dum-dum bullets as well as a respirator. He's got the commanding presence, gunfighter, as well as a third arm skill. And right next to him on the right hand side, that is Innsmouth, another neophyte hybrid who's got a hazard suit, chainsword, autogun, as well as an auto pistol. And then right behind him on the left-hand side, that is Arkham. He's a neophyte hybrid. He's armed with a hazard suit. He's got a power maul, autogun, auto pistol, and he's also suffering from 2 injuries, which is pretty sad. And right next to him on the right-hand side, that is their hanger-on. That is Old Doc Waitley. He is a rogue doc who's got a last pistol, a Medicaid kit, as well as a Medicaid skill as well. And Scream of the Emo rolled up for this guy to participate in this battle report. So now he's got his whole full gang participating on this one. In the center of the battlefield, on the left-hand side, that is Armitage, who's another neophyte hybrid. He's got a hazard suit, a respirator, and an auto pistol. He's also equipped with a mining laser. He's also got a third arm. Right next to him in the center, that is Johansson, which is a neophyte hybrid. He's got a hazard suit, a respirator, autogun, auto pistol, third arm, as well as a head injury. And right next to him on the right-hand side, that is Black Marsh, as well as Reed. Those are 2 neophyte hybrids. They're both equipped exactly the same. They got hazard suits, autoguns, as well as auto pistols. And that makes it the center deployment for Scream of the Emo's red faction. And on the right hand side we have a 3-man fire team. In the back, that is Simon Black. He is a hybrid alkalite. He's got a hazard suit, auto gun, as well as auto pistol, and a fighting knife, as well as a respirator. He's carrying a cult icon, so that way he can activate an additional fighter. He's also got the berserk skill, as well as a third arm. And then right in front of him on the left hand side, that is an aberrant named Zadok Allen. He's got mesh armor, a power hammer. He's also got the unstoppable as well as specialist skill. And right next on the right hand side, that is Wilbur Waitley, who is an aberrant as well. He's equipped with mesh armor as well as a power hammer. He's also got the unstoppable skill as well. And that pretty much makes it the right hand deployment for Scream of the Emo's Red Faction. Meanwhile, across the battlefield is Fresh Prince Bel-Air's deployment. On the left-hand side for the Iron Sights is a 4-man fire team. On the left-hand side, that's Johnny the Boy. He is a juvie. He's armed with mesh armor, an auto pistol, maul, and frag grenades. Up in front is another juvie named Clunk. He's got mesh armor, maul, stub gun with dum-dum rounds. He's also got an eye injury. And right behind them is the Toe Cutter, who is the leader of this gang. He's equipped with mesh armor. He's got a bolt gun as well as a maul. He's also got the commanding presence skill as well. He's also got a couple injuries, which is hobbled as well as spinal injury. And then finally on the right hand side, that is Dio Bondo. That is another juvie. He's got a mesh armor, maul, stub gun, and equipped with dum-dum bullets as well. And that makes up the left hand deployment for the Iron Sights. Meanwhile, in the center of the battlefield, on the left-hand side is a 3-man fire team of gangers. On the left-hand side, that is Starbuck, who's a ganger armed with a mesh armor, auto gun, frag grenades, maul. He's also got the hobbled injury as well. Next from the center, that's Bubba Zanetti. He is a ganger who's armed with mesh armor, an auto gun, and drop rig. And his auto gun is equipped with a telescopic sight, and he's also a specialist. And finally, right next on the right-hand side, that is Torque, who's another ganger. He's got mesh armor, a last gun, as well as demo charges. He's also packing a bolt pistol, and has the specialist skill as well. And then finally, on the right-hand side, there's another 2-man fire team. Up in front, that is the Knight Rider. He's a champion. He's equipped with mesh armor. He's got a heavy stubber as well as auto pistol and a drop rig. He's also got the connected skill, and he's also suffering from a head injury. And then right next to him on the right-hand side, that is their brute. That is Doc Dealgood, who is a lugger cargo servitor. He's got hairy carapace armor, a servitor combat weapon, as well as heavy stubber, equipped with a monocyte. He's also got the weapons platform special rules, as well as the ammo hopper special rules as well. And finally, on the far right-hand side, we have another 3-man fire team. On the left, that is Durango, who is a ganger equipped with mesh armor, a shotgun with solid and scatter shot. He's also packing a maul and a stub gun with dum-dum rounds. Right behind them in the back right there, that's Kundalini. He's a ganger armed with mesh armor. He's got a grenade launcher with frag and crack grenades, as well as a maul. And then finally, over there on the right-hand side, that is No Face. He's a ganger equipped with mesh armor. He's packing a flamer as well as a stub gun with dum-dum rounds. And that pretty much makes the right-hand deployment for the Iron Sights on this one. And before we go any further, we also have the Infiltrate special rules with the Genestealer Cults, and this is Benjamin Marsh. He is a hybrid alkalite. He's equipped with a hazard suit. He's got an auto gun as well as auto pistol, a respirator as well as a fighting knife. He's got the Infiltrate backstab skills as well as the third arm, and he's also suffering from a head injury. And that pretty much makes the deployment for this one. So with deployment over with, we go directly to the top of turn number 1, and both Scream of Emo as well as Fresh Prince Bel-Air, they roll off for initiative to see who has priority. So that takes us directly to the top of turn number 1 for the Genestealer Cults. Managed to get the priority on this one, and the first activation, Scream of the Emo decides to activate Benjamin Marsh. He goes charging directly into the back of Doc Dealgood. Man, he's all said and done with the combat. Managed to put 2 wounds on that cargo servitor, which is actually pretty good, considering since that guy's got 5 toughness, he's also packing 3 wounds as well. But the reason why is because Benjamin Marsh also has the backstab ability, which means that if he attacks him from behind or from the flank, he gets +1 to his strength, and since he's strength 4 as base, that put him up to strength 5, so that was absolutely devastating. Unfortunately for Scream of the Emo, though, he was not able to put the final wound onto Doc Dealgood, so because of that, these guys will be going for another round of combat. So for his very first activation, Fresh Prince Bel-Air decides to activate the Knight Rider, who then also does a group activation with Doc Dealgood. The Knight Rider charged directly into the flank of Benjamin Marsh, and the 2 characters actually open up with their attacks and close combat attacks directly into Benjamin Marsh. The Knight Rider's attacks pretty much flubbed for the most part, but it was Doc Dealgood who managed to knock down and cause a serious injury onto Benjamin Marsh as well. So now he's laying on the ground just kind of bleeding out for the most part, which is actually a very dangerous position for being in, because if he doesn't make a recovery at the end, during the end phase, he could be finished off with a coup de grace, and right off the bat, Scream of the Emo will lose one of his best fighters, so that part was pretty crazy. In response, Scream of the Emo does a group activation with Obed Marsh as well as Pikmin and Innsmouth, and also with Dagon, and that 4-man fire team actually spends both of their actions moving forward as quickly as they possibly can. And as you can see here, they're moving across the streets from the MCI Chemical Work towards the Quantum Building, using the Hedgehog down the right-hand side as cover. Looks like it's kind of going for a left flank attack. Meanwhile, Fresh Prince Belair does exactly the same thing with his left-hand forces. He decides to group activate the Toe Cutter, who also activates his 3-man Juvie squad of Diabando, Clunk, as well as Giant the Boy. And those guys actually spend both of their actions moving forward as quickly as they possibly can as well. Just getting to the base of the Quantum building as well. Looks like he's kind of going for a kind of intercept to protect his left-hand flank from the oncoming red faction. On the other side of the table, Scream of the Emo decides to do another activation phase as well. Decides to activate Cybin Black, and because he's got a cult icon, he can actually activate 2 fighters, and so he activates both Zadok Allen as well as Wilbur Whately, the 2 Aberrants in this gang, and the 3-man fire team do a double movement moving forward as well. Both of the Aberrants move forward 10 inches, while Cybin Black moves up forward 8 inches, and it looks like they're putting some pressure there on the right-hand flank of the Iron Sights. So in response to that, looks like Fresh Prince Belair is mirroring the same kind of tactics that Scream of the Emo is, so because of that, the rest of the turn is actually just dedicated to individual movements of individual fighters on both sides. So because of that, we're going to show these kind of group photos of all the fighters moving, because otherwise we'd spend forever going back and forth between individual fighters. So for the most part, for the rest of the turn, my friend Fresh Prince Belair, he decides to send up No Face as well as Durango as well as Kundalini as well. They move up double movements for both Durango as well as No Face, while Kundalini only moves up his normal movement allowance, and then he opens fire with his grenade launcher, firing a crack grenade directly into the Aberrants across the battlefield. Not only does he manage to hit Zadok Allen as well, he also put a serious injury on him because he opens with a crack grenade, which is strength 6, which is 1 point higher than the base toughness of 3, base toughness of 4 of the Aberrants. Because that managed to put 2 wounds on him with that damage attack that he did. So because of that, Zadok Allen is right now face down on the ground, bleeding out. Luckily for Scream of the Emo, though, both Cybin Black as well as Wilbur Whately, they pass their cool checks, and they pretty much stand their ground for the most part. Meanwhile, on the center of the battlefield, Johansson, Black Marsh, and Reed do double movements directly into that sandbag machine gun position there on the right-hand side, taking cover. And exactly the same thing happens with Armitage on the left-hand side. He does a double movement to go directly into the foxhole that's right there in the middle of their deployment area. And across the battlefield in the center, Fresh Prince Belair decides to activate his last 3 fighters, so both Starbuck, Bubba Zanetti, as well as Torque. Those guys spin double movements moving forward towards the Promethean tank tower right in the middle of the battlefield. And that's actually a brand new piece of terrain if you're wondering what that is, that little fuel tank tower that's right in the middle of the battlefield. That's another creation that was made by our Grand Wizard of terrain making, which is Iron Major, and it's a beautiful piece of terrain as well. Very, very detailed. Lots of different pieces of metal as well as wood and stuff like that, and rubble. It's just an amazing looking piece of terrain. But we'll talk about that later on another hobby side video when we talk about that terrain piece at a later time. And finishing up the end of the turn, the last 2 members of the red faction also move forward as well, with both, I believe that is, not Innsmouth, I'm sorry, that is Arkham, that's his name, Arkham as well as Old Doc Whately. They both do double movements to catch up the rest of the fire team right ahead of them. And that pretty much makes up the action phase on this one. So during the end phase, Zadok Allen managed to get back on his feet again with a flesh wound, and since he has the unstoppable rule, Scream of the Emo rolls a d6, actually rolls a 5, so because of that, the 1 flesh wound he does carry goes away, because that's one of the special abilities that these Aberrants have. At the same time, Benjamin Marsh also gets back on his feet again with a flesh wound, so he is 1 point less tougher in his toughness category, so he's a little bit easier to wound. But at the same time, though, Benjamin Marsh is a killer in close combat, so we'll see exactly what happens to those guys. And with the end of the recovery phase, that pretty much ends turn number 1. So here's an overhead shot at the end of turn number 1, and as you can see from this overhead shot, it looks like both the Orlocks as well as the Genestealer Cults are pretty much mirroring each other's movements. You have assault forces on both flanks on the left and right hand side moving towards each other to intercept the flanking forces. At the same time, you also have forces in the middle of the table of their deployment zones also moving forward, taking cover position in order to engage their enemy. And that pretty much makes up the movement phase, pretty much makes up turn number 1 for this one. So with turn 1 over with, we go directly to the top of turn number 2, and both Scream of the Emo and Fresh Prince Belair roll off to see who has priority. So that takes directly to the top of turn number 2 for the Orlocks, who managed to get the initiative on this one. So because of that, the very first thing that ends up happening is that Fresh Prince Belair decides to activate the Knight Rider, who also activates Doc Dealgood. And of course, they both go directly into close combat with Benjamin Marsh. Unfortunately for Scream of the Emo, the Knight Rider was able to put a serious injury directly onto Midget Marsh in the opening rounds of the combat, so he goes face down and he starts bleeding out as well. In the end, though, it is decided that Doc Dielgo, the Cargo's servitor, he actually does a coup de grace directly onto Midget Marsh and puts him directly out of action, putting a grievous injury onto that Acolyte hybrid. So because of that, he will go into recovery and he will miss out his next battle report. So that's pretty sad because that's a pretty good fighter for my buddy Scream of the Emo. So in response to being shot at with a grenade launcher with a crack grenade, Scream of the Emo decides to activate Simon Black, who also does a group activation for both Zadok Allen as well as Wilbur Whately, and both those guys do a double movement over to the left-hand side, taking cover behind the office building there, as well as that rubble piece right there for the Acolyte hybrid. Looks like they're trying to get out of the field of fire of Kundalini because that guy is pretty deadly with that grenade launcher of his. At the same time, Fresh Prince Bel-Air also activates the Toe Cutter, who also activates Diabando, Johnny the Boy, as well as Clunk. And those guys actually spend a double movement moving to the right-hand side instead of going forward. They actually take cover behind the Quantum Building, as well as the MCI Water Tower as well, and using the rubble there to protect their back. It looks like he's kind of going around the left-hand side of the battlefield to intercept the fire team that is coming their way from the Red Faction. So with that activation over with, we go to Scream of the Emo, who then also does another group activation with Obed Marsh. He also activates Pikmin, Innsmouth, as well as Dagon. And once again, that 4-man fire team does a double movement along the left-hand flank, skirting along the left-hand side of the Quantum Building, heading directly towards the Toe Cutter, as well as his 3-man Juvie posse that's awaiting from around the corner. In fact, you can see there on the top of the screen, you can see the base of one of the Juvies as well. So these two fire teams will be crashing into each other. And to be perfectly honest, I think it's going to be the Red Faction's going to have the advantage on this one, because they do have an Ambot, which is really deadly in close combat, and not to mention his leader, as well as two seasoned Neophyte hybrids are also coming their way towards him as well. So for his next activation, Fresh Prince Bel-Air then activates Bubba Zanetti, who actually moves up normal 5 inches, taking cover right next to the Promethean Tower, to taking some cover behind that rubble wall. And he also opens fire with his auto gun. And the reason why he's within range is because he does have a telescopic sight on that auto gun, giving him plus additional 6 inches to his range. So he opens fire directly into Johansson, which unfortunately he pretty much misses for the most part. And once again, all the group activations are pretty much over with, so if you do see groups of photos taking place, that's just because my friends are just taking, turns moving their soldiers one at a time, and I really didn't want to take a photo of each individual movement. So for this photo here, Johansson, Reed, as well as Black Marsh, those guys actually move up with double movements, taking positions in a line formation. 2 of them are taking cover behind that rubble pile, while the third one is taking cover behind those little chemical tanks there on the left-hand side. Meanwhile, across the table, both Starbuck as well as Torque also move up double movements as well, taking position behind the concrete pillar there that has the Johnny Court sign on it as well, taking cover so that way they don't get shot at by those Genestealer Cultists across the battlefield. At the same time, our friend Scream of the Emo decides to activate Armitage. He decides to abandon and occupying the foxhole and does a double movement over to the MCI tower over on the left-hand side, taking cover behind that concrete entrance as well. And try to get closer range with his mining laser because that weapon only has a 24-inch range. So meanwhile, Fresh Prince Bel-Air decides to activate Kundalini by himself. So you can see in this photo, Kundalini moves up 5 inches directly into one of the windows on the other side of the office building, and he does have a good line of sight advantage directly towards Simon Black. The only problem though is that Simon Black is partially covered with that rubble wall that he's kind of hiding on the other side of that building. So he decides to open fire with his grenade launcher, this time firing a frag grenade instead, so that way he has a better chance of actually hitting him. So he aims for a point that's right behind the rubble wall and he opens fire with his grenade launcher. And luckily for him, the frag grenade goes flying right through the window and right behind that cover where Simon Black is located and blowing up as well, catching Simon Black within the blast radius of that frag grenade. However, luckily for Scream of the Emo though, Simon Black only gets pinned. He gets hit by the frag grenade but is not injured at all, so because that he lays down face up to represent the fact that he got hit, but he is not wounded at this point. And at the same time, he also moves up Durango as well, does a double movement over to the right-hand side of the office building, so that way he's in the line of sight of both Starbuck down the right-hand side, so that way they can start intercepting Simon Black and his 2 aberrants on the flank of the battlefield. And he does exactly the same thing with No Phase as well, doing a double movement along the right-hand flank of the battlefield. Looks like he's trying to hook around the back, so that way he can catch the aberrants in a pincer attack, with No Face attacking from the back as well as Durango attacking from the front. And then finally, both Arkham, as well as old Doc Whately. Those guys actually spent double movements to catch up with Obed Marsh as the rest of the fire team assaulting on the left-hand side. And since nobody got injured for this round, there is no end phase, so we skip that. We go directly to the end of the turn. So here's an overhead shot of the end of turn number 2, and as you can see, the forces are slowly coming towards each other. Looks like both of my friends are actually kind of playing movement shenanigans for the most part, just kind of maneuvering and counter-maneuvering in order to get to better positions for each other. They're definitely closing the distance, and eventually these two gangs will clash it out, and when they do, it's going to erupt into a hailstorm of gunfire as well as blood-curdling combat, so that'll be kind of interesting to see exactly what happens next. So with the end of turn number 2 over with, we go directly to the top of turn number 3, and both Fresh Prince Bel-Air as well as Scream of the Emo roll off for priority to see who will be going first. So with that, we go directly to the top of turn number 3 for the Orlocks this time around, and once again, a group activation is also made. Fresh Prince Bel-Air decides to activate the Knight Rider, who also activates the cargo lugger Doc Dealgood. He actually spends a double movement to move the Knight Rider right next to that hedgehog, so that way he can get a closer look directly to the Genestealer Cultist, so that way he'll be able to shoot next round. And as for Doc Dealgood, he only actually moves him up his normal moon allowance of 4 inches and has him open fire with his heavy stubber directly into the mass of the red faction across the battlefield from him. And he also manages, not only does he manage to hit Johansson, who's across the battlefield from him, but he also manages to put a wound on him as well, putting a serious injury directly onto Johansson. So because of that, Johansson goes falling face first directly into the cold concrete, and he's laying on the ground, bleeding out, waiting into the end phase. Luckily for Scream of the Emo, though, Reed did pass his panic check, so he passes cool check, so he stays directly where he is on the left-hand side, right behind those chemical tanks. However, Black Marsh fails his cool check and runs back 9 inches directly to the MCI chemical tank farm, taking cover behind that ladder so that way he doesn't get shot at anymore by that cargo servitor. So in response to being shot at, our friend Scream of the Emo decides to activate Simon Black, who does a group activation using his cult icon for his 2 aberrants. The first of his actions, he has Simon Black do a double movement to the left-hand side, taking cover behind that rubble pile, which is the middle of the deployment area for the Genestealer Cultists. And at the same time, Wilbur Whately goes charging across the battlefield directly into No Face, so those two will be engaged in close combat. And Zadok Allen does exactly the same thing, charging directly into Durango and engaging him in close combat as well. When it was all said and done, Wilbur Whately put a grievous injury directly into No Face, just smashing him with that power hammer of his, just killing him right off the bat. So that part was pretty gruesome. So now No Face is nothing more than a red pasty smear on the cold concrete, which is pretty crazy. And because he dispatched No Face pretty quickly, he does a 2-inch follow-through, moving right past over his cold corpse and moving directly into the middle of the office building, heading towards Kundalini. At the same time, Zadok Allen also managed to put a serious injury directly onto Durango. He does not put him out of action, however, so because of that, Durango is laying on the ground bleeding out for the most part, and he's also carrying a flesh wound from the second damage that he took from that hammer, which is a pretty dangerous place to be in because in the next turn, Zadok Allen could finish him off with a coup de grace and put him directly into out of action, which would be horrific for my friend Fresh Prince Bel-Air. So with the threat of his right flank collapsing, Fresh Prince Bel-Air decides to activate Kundalini, and he doesn't actually move him. He actually spends a basic action so that way he can take aim with his grenade launcher, giving him a +1 to hit, which is pretty important because the target he's going after is Wilbur Whately, and since Wilbur Whately is within the short range measurement of his grenade launcher into him, he'll suffer -1 hit the penalty in order to hit him with that grenade launcher. So because of that, he does take that aim action in order to mitigate that penalty, and he decides to open up with a crack grenade going directly into Wilbur Whately. And not only does he manage to hit Wilbur Whately, he also managed to wound that guy and put him out of action, rolling out an out-cold result. So because of that, Wilbur Whately goes directly out of action, netting another death for the Red Faction and another victory point for the Iron Sights. Meanwhile, on the left-hand side of the battlefield, he decides to do group activation. Scream of the Emo activates Obed Marsh. Once again, he activates the Ambot Dagon. Dagon goes charging around the corner directly into Clunk, engaging him in close combat as well. He does try to do exactly the same thing with both Pikmin as well as Innsmouth, but unfortunately for him, though, he was not able to close a distance with those charges, so not much comes of it from that part. Dagon, however, just opens up with his Tunneling Cloud directly into the head of Clunk, causing a critical injury on that guy. So because of that, at the end of this battle report, Clunk, he does go out of action, but he'll need to roll up on the critical injury table to see exactly what happens to him. Whether he dies, whether they spend money to patch him up, or whether he suffers a serious and permanent injury of some sort. So that part was pretty crazy. And of course, Dagon does follow through with a 2-inch movement directly into Diabando, and at the same time, Fresh Prince Belair also activates the Toe Cutter. He charges the Toe Cutter directly into Dagon and does exactly the same thing with Johnny the Boy. And this 3-man team is a little outgunned in my opinion, directly fighting against an Ambot. These guys have pretty much armed with mauls and pistols for the most part, so they really don't have really much in terms of high strength attacks going against Dagon. And Dagon is an Ambot. He's got really high toughness as well as a lot of wounds, so it's pretty interesting to see how this combat goes. Unsurprisingly, the little 3-man team of Ironsides were unable to do anything to Dagon. However, Dagon did manage to put a serious injury directly into Diabando, so that guy is laying on the ground bleeding out for the most part, and also managed to put a flesh wound on him too, so that part was extremely rough. Meanwhile, in the center of the battlefield, Reed takes aim with his auto gun and opens fire directly across the battlefield directly into Torque because he has line of sight directly into that Ganger. And not only does he hit him, he also puts a serious injury on him as well, so because of that, Torque goes crashing face first into the concrete and he lays there bleeding out for the most part. Luckily for Fresh Prince Belair though, Starbuck did manage to pass his panic checks by passing his cool test, so he just pretty much stands his ground for the most part. So for his next activation, Fresh Prince Belair then activates Starbuck, who actually takes aim with his auto gun and opens fire directly into Zadok Allen, trying to take him out before he manages to take out Durango. Unfortunately for him though, his shot misses, so it just kind of goes wide, so nothing much really happens from that point on. For his next activation, Scream of the Emo then activates Armitage, who actually spends his turn moving a double movement forward directly next to that chemical tank, so that way he can partner up with Reed and take cover and start shooting at some Orlocks. And while that's occurring, Fresh Prince Belair decides to take a risk. He decides to move up Bubba Zanetti, have him actually climb to the top of the walls of the Promethean Tower, and have him open fire with his autogun directly into Reed. Unfortunately for him though, he does miss both of his shots, so nothing much really came of it, so that part was pretty tragic. And for the rest of the turn, Old Doc Whately as well as Arkham, they both do a double movement to catch up to the rest with Obed Marsh and the rest of his fire team, so that way they can start putting some more pressure on the left-hand flank of the battlefield. And with the last two activations, that pretty much makes the action phase on this one, and we go directly to the end phase. So during the end phase, Torque managed to get back on his feet again, only suffering a flesh wound, so he is a little bit easier to wound because his toughness drops by 1, but at the same time though, he's still a ganger, he can still shoot, he can still fight, and as far as I'm concerned, he is still a threat. And the exact same thing ends up happening with Durango as well. He managed to get back on his feet again, suffering another flesh wound, so now he's only toughness 1. If he suffers another flesh wound, he will of course go out of action, but at the same time though, it kind of buys us some time to deal with Zadok Allen, who's right up in his face with that power hammer of his. At the same time, Johansson also recovers as well, getting back on his feet again after suffering a flesh wound at the same time. So he does drop his toughness by 1, but at the same time though, he can still shoot, he can still fight, and for all intents and purposes, he is still a threat on the battlefield to be reckoned with. And lastly, Black Marsh manages to recover his cool again, earning himself another point of experience for rallying at the end of the battlefield, and he turns 180 so that way he can start participating in the next turn. And with that pretty much brings the end of turn number 3. So here's an overhead shot of the entirety of the battlefield at the end of turn number 3. As you can see, the attacks are taking place on the left as well as right-hand flanks of the battlefield. At the same time, the centered forces are moving towards each other. It looks like combat is pretty much taking place in terms of close fighting between the left as well as the right-hand flanks, while there's pretty much a trading of shooting going on in the center of the battlefield as well. So with the end of turn number 3, we go directly to the top of turn number 4, and both Scream of the Emo and Fresh Prince Belair roll off to see who has priority. So that takes us directly to the top of turn number 4 for the Genestealer Cults. So Scream of the Emo managed to get the initiative on this one. And for this first activation, he does a group activation with Obed Marsh, who also activates Pikmin. He also activates Innsmouth, as well as Dagon. And all these guys go charging directly into the fray. Both Pikmin as well as Innsmouth charge directly into Johnny the Boy, while Obed Marsh just kind of skirts around the back, waiting for an opening for him to charge into as well. So for the first opening salvos of the combat, Pikmin manages to take out Johnny the Boy by putting him out cold by taking that power pick of his and slamming it right directly into the forehead of Johnny the Boy. And since Johnny the Boy gets put out of action, once again Innsmouth as well as Pikmin go falling through with another 2 inches, going directly into the toe cutter. Meanwhile, across the battlefield, another group activation takes place when Fresh Prince Belair decides to activate both the Knight Rider as well as Doc Dealgood, and both those guys open up with their heavy stubbers directly across the battlefield into the center, opening fire with those heavy stubber rounds. And unfortunately for Scream of the Emo, his Neophyte Hybrid does go down with a critical injury result as well, so he goes out of action, and he will need to roll up on the critical injury chart to see exactly what happens to him, whether Scream of the Emo will pay money to actually save this guy, or whether let him get a crippling injury of some sort, or rather in worst case scenario he dies. But for the most part though, things pretty much work out for Scream of the Emo because he does have a road dock shop, so that usually helps him out in these kind of cases. Unfortunately for Scream of the Emo though, Reed does fail his cool check, so because of that he does run backwards 10 inches heading towards the MCI water tower because he doesn't want to deal with any of the chaos that is coming his way. So for his next activation, Scream of the Emo then activates Zadok Allen, who manages to put a grievous injury directly onto Durango, just smashing his head in with that power hammer of his, so because of that he goes down like a ton of bricks. And he decides to follow through 2 inches heading directly towards Kundalini, which is kind of a risky move in my opinion because if anything, this battle report has shown us that Kundalini is really good with that grenade launcher of his. He's kind of like a surgeon. He's been taking guys out left and right with that dang thing. So I'd be kind of worried for my friend Scream of the Emo and whether that was a wise choice or not. Meanwhile, on the left-hand side of the battlefield, Fresh Prince Blair decides to activate the Toe Cutter, who directs his attacks into Pikmin. Not only does he manage to wound that guy, he also manages to put a serious injury on him as well. So because that, Pikmin goes crashing face down to the cold concrete, and he is currently bleeding out right now, which is a pretty precarious place for him to be in because in the next turn, the Toe Cutter could finish him off with a coup de grace. Now, granted, he is also being attacked at the same time by Innsmouth, so that might dissuade him from doing that, but needless to say, it's still a dangerous position to be in regardless who you are. Meanwhile, in the center of the battlefield, Scream of the Emo then activates Armitage, and Armitage, since he has a third arm, firing a heavy weapon for him is a basic action, so because of that, he's able to move and also do other things so that way he can fire his mining laser. He decides to use that basic action to take aim so that way he gets +1 to hit because Torque is partially covered by that concrete block, and then he spends his second basic action to open fire with his mining laser. Not only does he manage to hit Torque as well, he also puts him directly out of action, rolling out an out cold result as well. So because of that, Torque goes out of the action for the rest of the battle report. At the same time though, Starbuck does pass his cool check, so he kind of stands his ground. However, at the same time though, Bubba Zanetti though fails his cool check, and he ends up running back, I think like 8 inches when he ends up doing. So he runs back like I think 3 inches along the wall, then he drops down another 3 in order to escape. So because of that, he doesn't want to get shot at either. So pretty, wise move as far as we're concerned. And once again, Kundalini takes a basic action to aim his grenade launcher, so that way he gets +1 to hit because he's trying to mitigate the -1 to hit modifier for being within close range with his grenade launcher, and he opens fire directly onto Zadok Allen. Not only does he manage to hit Zadok Allen, he also managed to put him a serious injury on him as well as a flesh wound because he decides to open up with a crack grenade. So Kundalini and this grenade launcher, man, that guy is super deadly in this battle report so far. And since at the same time we're kind of doing individual activations, Starbuck does go charging directly into Zadok Allen and finishes him off with the coup de grace, manages to put a grievous injury on him as well. So because of that, Zadok Allen goes directly into recovery, and he will not be participating in his next battle report. Now, if you're wondering why the Orlocks went back-to-back on their activations, it's because for the rest of this part of the turn, it's just individual soldiers moving around at this point. So instead of taking individual photos of all the fighters moving about, I decided to kind of take group photos in order to save some time on that one as well. So if you're wondering why that was the case in the last picture, that was why. The same thing happens here in the middle of the battlefield. Johansson as well as Cyben Black, they actually spend double movements moving forward as well, with Cyben Black moving along the office building heading towards Kundalini. At the same time, Johansson also takes cover behind that rubble pile as well, trying to get away, trying to close the gap between him as well as the Orlocks. Meanwhile, on the left-hand flank, both Old Dog Whately as well as Arkham kind of close the distance to march up with Obed Marsh, so that way they can continue on their attack on the left-hand flank. And with that activation, we also go into the combat phase, the end phase as well. For the most part, as you can see here in this photo, basically 2 critical injuries were the results what ended up happening for the end phase, for the recovery phase for this part. Both Diabano suffers a critical injury, and same thing with Pikmin as well. He also suffers a critical injury as well. So because of that, those guys will need to roll off to see exactly what happens to them at the end of the battle report. And finally, Reed manages to get his nerve back by passing his cool check, so because of that, he turns 180 because he's ready to go again. And at the same time, also netting himself a handy dandy point of experience at the same time. So with the end phase over with, we go directly to the top of the photo of the end of turn number 4, so that way you can see an overhead shot of the battlefield. For the most part, the right-hand flank and the center of the battlefield is pretty much on lockdown for the Orlocks. However, they are losing ground on the left-hand flank, and it's causing all kinds of problems for my friend Fresh Prince Bel-Air. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that takes us directly to the end of the game for the Genestealer Cults making the victory on this one. Fresh Prince Bel-Air decides to just kind of call a game at this point because he doesn't want to risk losing any more of his gangers at this point because he's lost almost half of his gang in this battle report alone. So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that takes us directly to the end of the game to the post-game where we talk about exactly what happened to each of the gangs as a result of this battle. So first off, we talk about the Iron Sights on this one. So 6 members of this gang all suffer injuries on this one. Torque and Johnny the Boys suffered out cold results, so they make full recoveries and no problem. No Face and Durango, however, they suffered grievous injuries, so they will miss out the next battle report because they're currently in recovery. Clunk with his critical injury. When it's all said and done, First Prince Bel-Air decided not to spend any money on Clunk and decided to, kind of risk it to see exactly what kind of injury or death he would receive from his injuries. In the end, he had a roll-off on the injury table and actually got a second eye injury on Clunk. Clunk already had one from earlier in the campaign, and because he has a second eye injury, he pretty much is blind, so because of that, he is eliminated from the roster. So because of that, he will not be participating in the campaign anymore. At the same time, Diabando also suffered an eye injury as well for his critical injury roll, so he loses 1 point to his Ballistic skill as well. For advancements, 2 members of the Iron Sights did advance up. Toe Cutter leveled up to level 3, earning the True Grit skills, so because of that, he is a little bit harder to kill now. At the same time, Kundalini also leveled up to level 4, earning +1 to his cool stat, so he's a little bit harder to scare off the battlefield. And it's kind of appropriate, because that guy was pretty much a killer in this battle report. From their territories, from their settlement, they earn 1 point of reputation from their settlement, as well as 60 credits. And at the same time, my friend Fresh Prince Bel-Air actually rolled 2 6s and actually recruited a brand new ganger for free. That guy's name is Red Eye, which is kind of appropriate because he just lost a member of his gang. At the same time, though, the second piece of territory which they had, which is the Drinking Hole, they lost that territory to the Red Faction because the Red Faction basically took that over as victory for this standoff. From the merchant, for the trading and merchant phase, they earned 60 credits from their settlement, as well as 10 credits from the scenario, giving them a grand total of 70 credits in all. With those 70 credits, they purchased a grenade launcher as well as a stub gun for Red Eye, so that way that guy can participate in the next battle report as well. For the reputation, they do earn 1 point of reputation for their settlement, as well as 1 point of reputation for fighting against the Red Faction for the very first time, but because this gang also bottled out, they lose 1 point of reputation as well. That brings a grand total to 25 points. The new record for the Iron Sights is 2 wins as well as 7 losses, and their new gang rating now is at 1,965 points. And finally, we have the victors, the Red Faction on this one, and they actually suffered quite a bit of injuries in this one. They actually took quite a beating considering the fact they're taking on one of the lowest ranking gangs in our campaign. They actually suffered 5 out of action results. Benjamin Marsh as well as Zadok Allen both suffered grievous injuries, so they go directly into recovery and will miss out on their next battle report, while Wilbur Whately suffered an out cold result, so he is perfectly fine with a full recovery. Pikmin and Black Marsh, however, both suffered critical injuries. Pikmin's critical injury resulted in an eye injury, so because they lose -1 to his Ballistic skill, and Black Marsh suffered a head injury, so he loses 1 to both his will as well as his intelligence characteristics. So that part was kind of rough as well. For advancements, 4 members of this gang did level up. Obed Marsh leveled up to level 3, earning +1 to his weapon skill. Pikmin leveled up to level 2, earning +1 to his movement. And Innsmouth leveled up as well to level 2, earning +1 to his cool stat. And then finally, Arkham also leveled up to level 2 as well, and he actually got the specialist ability, so now he can buy upgrades just like anybody else now. From their territories, from their settlement, they earn 1 point of reputation as well as 40 creds. From their mining works, they earn 2 points of reputation from that, as well as 80 credits from that one, and that's because they have a ambot that can work their territory for them. From the Refuge Drift, they also earn 40 credits from that, as well as 1 point of reputation from their brand new Drinking Hole territory that they managed to capture. In the merchant phase, they managed to earn 170 credits in total from their territories, as well as 10 credits from the scenario, giving a grand total of 180 credits. With those 180 credits, they purchased a grenade launcher for Johansson, as well as a web gun for Reed. So now those guys are packing special weapons. For the reputation, they earned 2 points of reputation from their scenario, as well as 4 reputation from their territories. That brings a grand total for the Red Faction to 29 points of reputation in total. Their new record now is at 4 wins, as well as 2 losses, and their new gang rating now is at 2,300 points. So that's going to do it for this one, you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all this greatest news about the hobby aspect on this channel. That's going to do it for this one, you guys. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace out.